Alright. Time for another review. This isn't the dorm. Well, hello everybody, subscribers and non-subscribers to Irish Pori Gang. Welcome back to another album review from me, Irish Pori Gang. Interesting story. I just got off an email from the corporation for getting Gavin off of his ass corporation. They just wanted to let me know that I should get off my ass and make some videos because I've been missing out some pretty important album releases. For instance, the Taylor Swift review. I was way too late for that, so I just didn't end up making a video on it. Also, the Kendrick beef with Drake, which is way more interesting than Taylor, to be honest. I've been missing out on a lot of that, so the Get a Gavin Off His Ass Corporation contacted me and told me to go make some damn videos because I haven't. I've just been playing Minecraft ever since I got home from college, but now I have some motivation and I'm gonna make this stupid review in one day. See that? See that? It says the 17th. This video will be out on the 17th. Mark my words, it'll happen. Don't mark my words. But anyway, now that that rant is out of the way, welcome back to First Impressions, which is the show where I review stuff the day after it comes out. Welcome back, I'm your host Gavin. Let's dive into it. But before we dive into it, first, order of business. We got three, that's right, 3 orders of business today. Order of business number 1, we're gonna review the Billie Eilish album. Number 2, I gotta talk about my rating system and why it's changing. And number 3, I have a Taylor Swift mini review at the end of this video. So, if you want to skip past something, go ahead, skip to the timestamps. They can be found in the description below. Just scroll down a little bit, you'll find some timestamps. Okay, now that that's out of the way, let's talk about Billie Eilish, William Eyelash. I'm sure nobody's ever made that joke before, but let's get right into it. What do I think of Billie? She's cool. Voice crack, wow, okay. As we look at her past works, we can see this is her 3rd album. Of course, her first album being, I don't remember the name of it. It's like, oh, what is it called? It's like, Where Do the Monsters Go? I don't actually remember. But I haven't listened to that album in a while, and I didn't really have time to this morning. So I don't really remember what my verdict was on that song. It was very popular when I was growing up, kind of in junior high. But I don't remember the album all that well. Just the main single, Bad Guy, of course, which was everywhere. Her 2nd album, however, Happier Than Ever, I gave that like a high 6, low 7. I thought it was pretty good. You know, I thought it was pretty decent. It shines above some of the other bedroom pop that seems to be pretty popular nowadays, but it doesn't, it kind of falls between that kind of bedroom and indie zone, but it didn't wow me. It was just pretty good. There are some standouts on that album. For instance, I thought Haley's Comet was quite a nice and well put together song. But what really intrigues me is, of course, the song that everyone's been listening to on social media recently, which is What Was I Made For off of the new Barbie soundtrack, which was a single that, I think it won a Grammy for something. I don't remember what it was, though. But that song really intrigues me because, despite it being everywhere right now, it is a very, very well put together, thoughtful, and interesting song. I watched an interview with her, actually, on how she made it and how she decided to sing it in a certain way, and it was very insightful, and she really put some work into that, and it paid off. The Barbie single I gave a low 9, because I thought it was quite good, but now, I am very excited for this 3rd album. I have been anticipating it for a while, ever since it was announced. It had a pretty quick turnaround. I feel like it was just announced, but now we are ready to listen to it and give it our go-through. I was very excited to listen to it, so let's see what I said. It's a pretty decent length album. Only 10 tracks, 42 minutes long or 45 minutes long, somewhere in the 45-minute range, which I think the perfect length for an album is between 45 minutes and an hour, so I think she's hitting that range pretty well. It doesn't feel too bloated by any means when you only have 10 tracks. But the first track is Skinny. I gave Skinny kind of a medium 8, kind of a middle 8. It's a very, simple song. Billie and Phineas are always a duo that have been able to really be very tasteful in how they approach the production of such a track, and it really shows here. It's such a simple setup, because you just have that melancholy guitar and kind of those swirly synths in the background. It's a very, very simple setup. And I think that really sets Billie's voice up to succeed really well. One of the benefits you can have when you have a producer and songwriter duo who work so well together, and of course they're siblings. They've known each other forever. They know each other's quirks, each other's habits, each other's styles, what will help each other succeed very well because they're siblings, so of course they will. But when you have a producer-songwriter duo that is this tight, they can really bring out each other's strengths quite well, and I think that's what they continue to do to this day throughout their 3 albums, because they don't have any ghostwriters or any other songwriters. It's literally every song is just credited to that duo, and it's quite a powerful duo, as we can see. Some people don't like Billie's whispery kind of voice. They think it's kind of lame or not quite good or whatever, but I think that when you have a production setup that really benefits it to this degree, it doesn't really matter so much, because I think it pops in the setting that Phineas has arranged for it, and that the two of them have really collaborated together to create a great setting for Billie's voice to shine in the way that it should. The lyrics are nothing crazy. It's very much just a very melancholy and simple song, which just thrives when you give the production space to breathe, and you give the track space to do what it needs to do to get its point across, and I think that letting this song breathe and be simple and be melancholy really paid off. There's also a really nice shift from kind of the alt-pop style that we know Billie can do into the sort of almost classical tone near the end of it with the string arrangement, which is quite nice, and there's a nice transition at the end. Hence my medium 8. Track number 2 is called Lunch. I gave Lunch a medium 7. It's a really cool little headbanger, which serves as like a great hook for the top half of the album, which I think is something we haven't really seen from Billie too much, as Billie has really kind of leaned into that sort of melancholy sort of feel and tone for the vast majority of her songs. So hearing something that's a little bit more upbeat, a little bit more up-tempo, you know, it kind of gets you going, kind of gets you excited, especially second track in the album. You had your opener, you had your mellow welcome on in, and then you have your hook, which I think is a good setup for the album. This hook is quite nice. The bass hook is really neat. It's not very complicated. It's a very simple bass hook, but it fits right in with the production. The drums are very tight. It's very simple. It's very simple, but very purposeful, which I think is kind of what they're going for, and I think it succeeds really well here. And the guitar arrangement that comes in near the end is quite nice. It really fills out the end. It makes it feel like the song is heading somewhere. It makes it feel like it's driving, which I think is a really nice touch. But this song just serves as a kind of upbeat song that we haven't heard quite out of Billie yet, especially on Happier Than Ever, which was a very melancholy, reserved album. Content-wise, it's kind of a neat little exploration of sexuality, which is nice to hear from an artist who we haven't really heard. And we haven't heard it explored by Billie in such a forward way yet, so to hear this was kind of an interesting change of pace, which I welcomed. The lyrics are nothing impressive. They're pretty decent. They're very basic. Nothing's really ever veiled in the lyrics. But I don't really think the song needs to have that, personally, because it's just an exploration of the excitement of sexuality and what that can be. So, I mean, it doesn't really need that sort of super poetic beauty or whatever. It's just a song about freedom and exploration, and it doesn't need to be anything more than that, I don't think. It's also just a neat little triplet rhyme scheme, which I like. I always kind of like triplet rhyme schemes. I think they're quite cool when they're pulled off well, and I think it is pulled off well here. Overall, it's a welcome change of pace, and a neat second entry to the album. CHIHIRO was the third track, and I gave it a low 8. It's an interesting one, as it almost feels like it falls under the genre of house music, but it doesn't quite do that, of course. It still has that kind of dark alt-pop flavor, which Billie is very known for, but it does have kind of house elements, and the buildiness, in the kind of four-on-the-floor electronic drum machine sort of feel, but it's not a drum machine. It could be, I don't actually remember. The point is, it's very driving, kind of like house music. I think the synth stuff is really well put together. There's some nice, like, arpeggiated builds, which really emphasize the feeling of the song. There is a decently serious flaw, however, in that the builds don't really lead to anything. They kind of build, and then they dip off, and typically I kind of like when if a song is going to do the fake build to a dip off, I kind of like when there's a break and then it hits, but it doesn't really do that here. It just kind of builds and dips, and it's just like, okay, why? Why was the build there if there's nothing? And then it just kind of builds again and does the exact same thing. There's no grand finale, really. It just builds, and then nothing happens. So I feel like that momentum problem is a bit of a hindrance for the song, holding it back a little bit. However, the lyrics are very strong on this one, which is a very big plus for this. It's probably the most introspective song on the album thus far, and Billie's like deliberate monotone delivery really brings the emotion across, which I think helps a lot to this song's benefit. Birds of the Feather is the next track. I gave it a low 7. It's a short hop away from CHIHIRO. It's pretty similar, which I think it's a neat little bop, you know? It has a lot of spunk to it, which I think is always fun to see from an artist, that we haven't really seen a spunky song quite before. Obviously, we saw the spunk on the second track, but we've seen it here again, which is nice. There's some neat sounds that really come in, such as at the end there's this neat, like, almost theremin tone. I think it's a synth, but it's trying to emulate a theremin, which is kind of cool. However, I don't think this song stands out quite as well as tracks 2 and 3, which preceded it, just because the metaphors and poetic devices, they're a bit old. There's nothing super fantastic in the lyrics, and verse 2 kind of sticks out as not very good. I don't like verse 2 very much at all. However, it does get points for the nice melodic hooks in the production and in the instrumentation, which stick out, and they're produced really nicely into this thing. Track 5, Wildflower, I liked a lot. I gave it a low 9. It's a brilliantly put together track, which just does a great job capturing the inner conflict of, like, a lingering regret. And it does a great job not just capturing what Billie tells us, but what the subtext is and what the instrumentation is doing to support that. I think it's just a really nice conglomeration of those aspects which really make it into a great song. I just feel like the song structure, like, really represents the feeling of living a life where an aspect that you know is wrong is kind of haunting you and always in the back of your mind, if that makes any sense. It starts out very sad and sort of buried with this interesting, like, acoustic guitar sort of feel to it. And then sooner or later, the battle in the protagonist's mind sort of comes out, and the song gets louder and more swelly and stuff like that, which kind of represents the battle in her mind raging. And then there is a big cutoff, and you think the song is over until you notice there's still a minute left. And then there's this very dull, very muted sort of tone, which is just kind of the defeat and kind of giving in to the shame that comes with the protagonist's mind as she wrestles back and forth with this very big issue that she's wrestling over in the song. The lyrics are very self-reflective and communicate the story very well, yet still leave a lot open for the listener to figure out and puzzle together, which I always like, because it's not just this confusing mess, but it's also not giving you every bit spoon-fed on a silver spoon. It's very much giving you what is happening and letting you figure out the rest as the song goes on, which I think is a really tough thing to achieve as a songwriter, but she does it very well here. Overall, it's a very neat piece, and I liked it quite a lot. Number 6 is the greatest. I actually gave it a high 8, but I must admit that I didn't quite like it at first. I will admit that. I thought it was taking a while to go anywhere, and was just kind of sitting in one spot, and I was kind of considering giving it 5-ish. But, however, the back half of this song is really awesome. There's a sick build into, like, a really nice key change, which is very reminiscent of, like, a 90s pop ballad. It strangely reminded me of All By Myself, the Celine Dion classic. But it's very different from that, of course, but that's the vibe I got from that one key change. It's very powerful, and the vocals really explode after that, and the instrumentation explodes, and I just thought it was very, very cool, and the back half was quite strong. It was more than enough to bring the rather lacking front half up to reach that high 8 grade that I gave it. And again, the lyrics are never really the focus here. It's more so Billie's delivery and her emotion, which just comes through really powerfully on these lines. Which I think is cool, how she can just take kind of more simple, more not as complex lyrics and really just bring the complexity just through the human voice, which I think is a really powerful thing that not every singer can do. And I think people really undersell her talents and kind of call her the whisper singer, when really she's a lot more than that. And it's very powerful here, just as it is across the record. Number 7, L'amour de ma vie, which is French for the love of my life. I gave it a high 4. I didn't think it was quite good. The song just doesn't hit. The front half is okay, I guess, but the transition in the back half just doesn't work at all. It's almost trying to be something off of, like, Daft Punk's Discovery or something, but it does it far worse than that. The vocal filters just fall flat. I don't find them engaging whatsoever. And it's just an attempt at Daft Punk, but worse. It sticks out as just a odd and rather unjustified and unmotivated choice, which I did not enjoy. It's a dud, unfortunately. Most albums have them, and this is the dud for this album, and it just simply doesn't work. The Diner I gave a low 6. It's pretty mediocre. The sort of booming synth bass is a neat tone, and the lead synth I find to be quite lame and honestly corny, which is unfortunate because that bass end, that low end, is quite powerful, and the high end, the lead synth, it just sounds stupid, for lack of a better term. and it's something that I'd find at like the bottom of a synth patch list for GarageBand iOS. It's a song that has potential, but is ultimately really undermined by like a weak sound in the front half of the song that fails to rope in a listener and keep them listening. It's an interesting change of pace to hear a tonal shift like this into discussing a close shave with a crazy stalker fan. So in terms of the lyrics, it is that interesting tonal shift, which I didn't hate, but it just falls short of the standard set by the rest of the album, where the material is far better. Number 9 is Bittersweet. I gave it a low 8. I thought it was quite better. Speaking of a tonal shift, here comes Bittersweet is what I wrote down. With a very loud and kind of attention-hooking opening, the song really manages to hook you on quite quick with that kind of wall of synth that hits you immediately, and then it transitions into a very driving 808 kick section, which eventually grows back those sweeping synth sounds they kind of re-enter, which is nice that she didn't just use those synth sounds and then Phineas threw them away, but they're there for the duration of the song, kind of coming back in and out sort of thing. The transition into the second part of the song is also really neat, with a cool pitch-bending bit, but the back half ends up being a bit quieter, which is fine if it weren't for the fact that it takes a bit too long to build up to the next section of the song, which leaves you a bit underwhelmed for that middle section. I found the middle section to be quite underwhelming. The ending is quite nice, though. There's some cool, like, slowdown and some very welcome change-ups which are added in the production, which really helps build some intrigue with that almost chiptune sounding outro at the end. There was some high highs and some new stuff, but also some pretty boring lows in the middle. And the finale track, the grand finale, is Blue, which I gave a middle 9. I quite liked it, quite a lot, actually. The grand finale album opens with hooking the listener in with a very heavy opener. The swirling harmonies are really nice and quite nice to listen to. Almost reminded me of like a Leve track off of Bewitched or something like that. The front section ended up being just pretty good to me, but the second section ended up being far more intriguing, with those very haunting piano chords and some very nice singing from Billie Eilish, kind of quieter, more reserved. The piano suits her and she suits the piano. Great production by Phineas on his end. The lyrics on this track might be the cleanest and most polished sounding on the song across the entire album. The perspective and emotion of the subject is very crystal clear and developed with just brilliant clarity, but also a brilliant tenderness, which cannot be understated here. It's emphasized by brilliant piano and synth production and instrumentation there. That second section is by far my favorite snippet on the entire album. If it was just that snippet for like 30 seconds, I probably would have given it a 10 if it was like just that snippet and an interlude. But it's a full song, so here we go. The third section is also kind of short. It's a tad below that lovely piano section I just finished talking about, but the fourth section is quite nice. It's a lovely strings arrangement, which I like a lot. It's just very well produced, very well composed was my word. I think the composition really nails and is the takeaway from this, because the composition of that strings section is quite nice. And this is a song that it wowed me, and it's a great conclusion. I don't think she could have picked a better song to end the album with, because it just feels like a conclusion, and it feels like the album is nice and tidy and wrapped up in a bow. The song just gets stronger as it goes, which is always what you want. You always want your strong song to get stronger as it goes, and I really thought the album couldn't have ended any better. Let's talk results now. I averaged out my scores, and it averaged out to about a 7.4, which will be a middle 7, which I think is fair. I think that 6 and that 4 drag it down quite a bit from what it could have been. But I feel like the story the album tells is also quite nice. It's not like one story, but the arc of the album is very nice, and I feel like is coherent and makes sense, and the finale and the opener mirroring each other with both tracks having a strings outro I thought was a really nice parallel to set up. Ultimately, I think the best song was by far Blue. It was just a fantastic conclusion to the album. I think Wildflower is close behind it, but I do think Blue takes the cake. I think the worst song was probably L'Amour de ma vie, just because it's just weak. It just doesn't stick out, and it just feels like a dip in quality. It's not bad by any means, it's just very mediocre and a little bit below that. As far as final thoughts, I think this is definitely Billie Eilish's strongest album so far, except that first album, which I don't know much about, but from what I have heard off of that first album, I think that the third album is stronger than what I have heard off of that first album, which is a bit of an unfair justification to make, but I think it is clear that this is Billie Eilish's best work so far. There's more of a dynamic range of melancholy and bitterness on display, which we haven't seen from her. that nice range of going from both ends of the kind of tonal spectrum, which we didn't see in Happier Than Ever. I thought Happier Than Ever could have used some more variation, which I thought was its downfall, which is why I kind of gave it that 6-7 range. Billie and her brother and producer Phineas have just proven that they can put out a really good album that really is strong, and I think will stand the test of time for a while. I don't think this is the type of album that we'll be hearing in supermarkets in 10 years or anything, but I do think it is a song that her fans will really appreciate, and I think that fans of the genre of this kind of alt-pop mood can really appreciate it for years to come as well. I think they've really proven that as a pair they can just put out material that is raw and yet tasteful in every way. And their partnership should last as long as they keep trying to push their limits and keep trying to expand with every album, which I do see them doing. And this is a significant step up from Happier Than Ever, and I'm excited to see what comes next. Because Billie has really grown as an artist since her debut way back when, what was it, 2016? It was a while ago. And it's exciting to see where she goes from here, and I'm very excited. Ultimately, I am feeling that I'm going to give this one a middle 8, and I quite enjoyed it. I would grade it as an excellent album. And let's talk a little bit about ratings, because I want to move from the letter system that I've been using to a number system, just because I think it works a little better, it's a little bit less complicated, a little bit easier to understand, a little bit of a less objective system, if you know what I mean. So we're going to be switching over. Let's just talk about that a little bit. As you can see, I prepared this handy-dandy chart in MS Paint, and we're going to go over it right now. So, as you can see, it'll go from 0 to 10. 0 is the absolute worst of the worst, 10 is the best of the best. Zeros and 10s will be pretty rare around here. You might not even see a 0 because I don't really like giving out zeros very much. 5 is a mid-album. 5 is an album that just exists. 6 and up can be considered a good review. 4 and below can be considered a bad review. And that's about how it's going to work. As you can see, I've come up with an adjective to describe each number, but it's roughly going to correlate to A plus is a 10, F is a 0, and a B, C plus is going to be the 5 range, so that's kind of about what I'm correlating it to, but it's kind of going to be a new system, so let's just acknowledge that as I start using numbers today. I know, big deal. Let's transition into the third section now that we've reviewed the Billie Eilish album, and talk a little bit about Taylor Swift, so ignore Billie Eilish in the background now. Actually, let me change that.
A few minutes later.
Okay, now that my background has changed, let's talk a little bit about Taylor Swift's album, because I promised some people that I would review it, but ultimately, I sat down 3 separate times to try and listen to this thing through, and I ended up getting distracted all 3 times. And so by the time that Billie Eilish's album came out, I realized I hadn't made a review for this thing, and then I was like, oh shoot, what do I do? So we're throwing it in here as an afterthought, admittedly, but let's talk a little bit about this album. I'm not going to go super in-depth, but this is a mini review. Ultimately, let's talk a little bit first, actually, about my experience with Taylor Swift and what I think about her music so far. I think that Taylor Swift she's a very polarizing artist, of course. Some people absolutely love her and will go sob at her concerts when she sings a Taylor Swift song, shocker, and other people just absolutely shit on her without a second care in the world. Ultimately, I think that Taylor Swift is a strong songwriter and a strong poet, a strong modern poet, which people have always in history had a difficulty grasping modern poetry because it is different and it is new and it is not like the old poems of yore. But I think she's a strong modern poet compared to other people for sure. And ultimately, when I think of her work, I think her highlight was probably 1989. I think that is a 10 out of 10 pop album. I think that is probably one of the best pop albums of the 2010s, if not the best. And I think her peak comes with that album and also Speak Now, which is a very strong entry. However, I feel that she's kind of slipped into a bit of a musical hole, I guess I would call it recently. Midnights, I would only give maybe a middle 6, just because I felt the instrumentation was just so boring, and the songs did not stick out from each other. However, I thought that it was produced well, and her lyrics were probably at the peak of their game. She probably has the best lyrics in Midnights, but it's just bogged down by boring instrumentation. And so when I heard that she was making this album, I was curious to see, I had a feeling she would continue the Midnights sort of vibe, but I was hoping that she would maybe go back to her roots a little bit with 1989, but I was interested to see what happened. And ultimately, I ended up finding myself very bored listening to this album, just because the writing isn't as strong as Midnights. Midnights is quite the achievement of songwriting, and yet this album, I found it to be wildly inconsistent. I found there to be stickouts. For instance, My Boy Always Breaks His Favorite Toys is a highlight of that album, and that is a nice, well-written song, but I didn't find that she was at all consistent with what we had known her in the past. For instance, everyone's favorite line, Touch Me While Your Boys Play Grand Theft Auto, and also, like, the 1830s, but that, the slavery. I get what she's trying to do. I get that she's trying, I understand, and I've heard the side that she is trying to emulate in the GTA line, a high school sort of vibe, and I get that in the slavery line she's trying to talk about what she thought as she was a kid, but these lines just come across as distasteful no matter what their intent is. They just come across as quite distasteful, which I don't enjoy. I don't enjoy listening to songs that just make me think, what? This is odd, you know? Like, I don't quite like it so much. And so I feel like that was a notable weakness, is that the lines just don't hit as hard. But more importantly, I felt that just the production here was just not good at all. I find that musically it was just as dull as Midnight's, but the production was not strong at all. Nothing really hit. And I think it is a sign that Taylor Swift and Jack Antonoff's working relationship has kind of petered out, and I think that they need to go in separate directions if they are to achieve something great again, because it just felt very empty and it didn't support what the song needed in almost any instance. And so musically I found it to be a major letdown and a sign of boredom. Now there are like some shining moments on this album, as I mentioned earlier, but ultimately it just comes across as a bit boring. Also, it's far too long. It's like a 75-minute runtime when it only needs to be 50. I feel like it goes on for far too long, and if you're going to have an album that is over an hour, it is my strong opinion that if your album is that long, you need to have variation, and there isn't variation on this track. It doesn't take me on a journey. I feel like I'm in the same place I was when I started when I left off, and it doesn't really take me anywhere. And so that's a major problem for an album that is 75 minutes long. If you have an album that is shorter, 45, 60 range, maybe 60. If you're in the 45, 50 range, I think, you can get away with an album that doesn't really go anywhere. For instance, Alice in Chains' Jar of Flies album, very short, it's like 36 minutes long, and it's very constant. But you can get away with it because it's short. However, here it's 75 minutes of the same thing, and it's over-bloated. And then she puts out an extra 15 tracks or so later with the Anthology edition, which don't really add anything to the journey. It's just this, more or less the same thing. And so I feel like the Anthology was slightly stronger because it tried some more things, but the standard basic 16 song album, I don't remember. The standard edition of the album is far weaker than that, even compared to the mediocrity of the Anthology version. And so I just didn't find anything that really sticks out. I think the production was weak, to sum it up, and it's just weak production, fake profundity, and there was not much there. And so unfortunately I had no other choice than to give it a high 3 and call this one of the worst entries into Taylor Swift's discography. And so that's just what I'm going to give it. Taylor Swift is just too generic, and it's gotten to the point where she needs a new producer, and I think that is the main problem. However, I don't really blame her fully. She's been very busy on her Eras tour, but I think that is a major problem, which contributes to that album's weakness. Because I think that with her busyness touring, I think she should have been focusing on touring and not kind of released this as a sort of side project, which doesn't come across well. And I think she should have taken more time to make sure that this album was completely dialed in before sending it out, and so I think it just really suffers from being bogged down by the busyness of the Eras tour. That is my verdict. Billie Eilish gets a middle 8, while Taylor Swift gets a high 3. What do you think? Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? I don't know, but I need to, as the email told me, get off my ass and do something. I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching.